Welcome to No Apologies. It's Friday. I'm Dana Lash. Juicey Got Justice! If you haven't heard, of course, I'm talking about Jussie Smollet, not Juicy Sommelier, which that's a position with wine. Yesterday, Jussie got convicted on 5 counts for staging a fake anti-gay, anti-black attack on himself. The only person in America who continues to buy that this attack happened is him. I don't even think he's mentally ill. I think he's just vain. But today, before this headline disappears, I really feel like we should stop, pause, consider the significance of this. Because in many ways, Jussie Smollet and this fake staged attack is the perfect metaphor for the moment in which we live. It's a distillation of the current zeitgeist in America. And Jussie Smollett is the ultimate avatar for the new movement. We've become a nation absolutely obsessed with victimhood. We are raising a generation who define themselves by how big of a victim they can be. Victimhood is the new merit. It's the new way to move up in society. And the more ways you can be perceived to be a victim, the greater the demands you can make on the rest of society. And the lesson is not lost on people. People get how the new game is played. Merit and hard work get you nowhere. Complaining, that victimhood, that's the new fast track to success. And we know this is true because, hi, Jussie Smollett, look what this guy did. He's an actor. He was making $1 million. He was making $1 million a year on Empire. But that wasn't enough for Jussie, so he concocted this plan. He was going to hire 2 Nigerian actors that he had met on the set, and then he was going to have them help him stage a fake attack on himself. Now, normal people would go, why would you do this? Because he wants to be a victim, right? To gain sympathy, so people would feel bad for him. Jussie, poor Jussie. And if he could do that, if he could leverage his victimhood for his career, then why not do it? See, Jussie Smollett didn't have enough. He wanted more. And where his merit couldn't get him, he decided to victimize himself, to drive himself all the way. And so in the process of doing that, he victimized all the rest of America. Now, anybody who had a brain understood quickly that there were some shenanigans with this story, right? He was conning everybody. But the party that also cons everybody with victimhood played right into it. And see, we have to remember that. Because Democrats have one card, playing on people's resentment. And that resentment could be about anything, about race, sexuality, possessions. It doesn't matter, because the key is making you feel like your life should be better. And it would be if it weren't for somebody else taking your place or making your life worse. And Democrats want you to focus on that fact that somebody has more than you. Someone somewhere has more than you. And they want you to be angry about it and jealous about it and resent society for creating your situation because apparently you had no fault in it, right? It's not your fault. The reason that others have more is not because they worked harder, it's because society likes them more. Because they gives them more privileges, because they're straight or white or male. And if Democrats were in charge, they remind everyone that they would make everything fair and actually equitable, which is the opposite of equality. So this is the whole Democrat victimhood con game. Their whole platform rides on you believing it. So of course, Democrats believed Jussie Smollet's ridiculous story. Do you remember what Joe Biden said at the time that the story broke? He said, quote, and on Twitter, he said, "What happened today to Jussie Smollett must never be tolerated in this country. We must stand up and demand that we no longer give this hate safe harbor, that homophobia and racism have no place on our streets or in our hearts. We're with you, Jussie," end quote. And who could forget the Vice President, Kamala Harris, who said this, quote, "Jussie Smollett is one of the kindest, most gentle human beings I know, and I am praying for his quick recovery." This was an attempted modern-day lynching. No one should have to fear for their life because of their sexuality or color of their skin. We must confront this hate, end quote. These 2 tweets are still up. Nobody's recanted any statement. Nobody's apologized for it. Nobody's condemned Jussie Smollett from the Harris or Biden camps, and definitely not Harris or Biden themselves. I mean, after all, this was the most despicable thing a very elite and a very privileged person like Jussie Smollett could do. He put an entire country through hell. You know, people saw that an injustice had been done, and so Chicago police put in thousands of hours of manpower to figure out how to deliver justice, all to look for a hate crime that didn't happen. Think about that for a moment. He sat back as all of this was happening, and he let it go on and on and on. And he continued speaking fuel to the fire of division between community and police. He went to his trial still arguing that he was set up, because once a victim, always a victim, apparently. And Democrats went right along with it, even if nobody else did. And I mean literally nobody else. So 2 clips to illustrate this. First, NBA great Charles Barkley in one of the most hilarious segments I've ever seen in my ever-loving life on Sports Illustrated. This was inside, I think it was Inside the NBA. You have to watch what he said about this, because it was everywhere. Watch.
America, let me just tell you something.
What's that?
Do not commit crimes with checks. Come on, man. You cannot, if you're going to break the law, do not write a check.
Because you're writing a check that what? You're behind cash.
Yo, man, you cannot cash up. Hey, get cash, man.
I mean, this went on for the whole show. I mean, that particular segment went on for like 8 minutes. All of America knew that this was a scam for the ages. I mean, for real, you're in the middle of a polar vortex going to get a sandwich at 2 a.m. Polar vortex. That's like not even a blizzard. It's a polar vortex that's like angrier than a blizzard. Here's Dave Chappelle, who perfectly describes how insanely fake the story was from the get-go. Watch.
Black people never feel sorry for the police, but this time we even felt sorry for the police. Can you imagine if you was a police veteran taking this kid's police report? Okay, Mr. Smollet, please tell me what happened. All right, 2 a.m. You left the house at 2 a.m. It's minus 16 degrees. All right. You were walking. All right. And where were you going? Subway. Sandwiches? That's when the men approached you? Did you see them? Do you have any? Okay, what do they have on? MAGA hats. MAGA hats on in Chicago. Excuse me one second, Mr. Smollet. Frank, come here for a second. Find out where Kanye West was last night.
Everybody knew it was a scam. I mean, it was the most ridiculous story ever. He said 2 white guys with MAGA hats got me, and then it turned to 2 pale guys with MAGA hats got me. And then it turned out it was these 2 Nigerian actors that I was helping out, and they were gonna do me a favor. But I didn't do it. They just decided to come and get me. Even though they dressed up and went to gay pride parades and bathhouses, they suddenly hated the gays and they wanted to come get me. I was still a victim. And then I still can never get over this. They literally went to a hardware store and purchased kidnapper supplies. But the legacy media, they love victimhood, just like the Democrat Party, and so they never questioned it for a second. Take a look at Brian Stelter.
The narrative has once again changed from victim, to villain, back to victim. It's been very confusing, as Ryan was saying. People don't know what to believe, and we may never really know what happened on the street that night in Chicago. But for his fans, for his friends, this is a triumphant moment that he can now get back to what he wants to do, which is work.
I have you noticed this beauty right down here? Just kidding. Now, see, the spud was wrong. Jussie is a victim. Of course, we all know that he's the opposite. He's the perpetrator. I mean, we knew it then. After being guilty on 5 out of 6 counts, and I don't even know why it wasn't 6 out of 6, we all definitely know it now. So is CNN criticizing Jussie Smollet? Is CNN apologizing to the country for hyping all of, he lied, he outright lied. I mean, who could forget his alligator tears when he was on with Robin Roberts and I just don't know if I can heal again. And then Robin Roberts, by the way, today started blocking everyone who was asking, where's Robin Roberts today? She blocked everybody. What's most important is keeping the victimhood narrative going at all costs. And that means Democrats, they gotta hype that victimhood all the time, whether it's Christine Blasey Ford, you remember her? If you don't remember the Kavanaugh saga, she's the lady that had 2 front doors. And that flimsy story about everything that she said about Kavanaugh and the other accusers that turned out to be completely just manufactured. Actually, there was one other. What about the hands up, don't shoot in Ferguson, which literally never happened? according to 3 separate forensic reports and also eyewitnesses in the community. Or saying that just a car decided it had enough and it was going to run over people in a parade in Waukesha, rather than blame Darrell Brooks, the actual perpetrator, the criminal who did it. Victimhood's the narrative. They cannot deviate from it. And people like Jussie Smollet know this. And that's why they don't deviate from that victimhood narrative either. Now watch him put on, this is actually probably Jussie Smollet's greatest acting performance ever. This was that interview I was talking about on Good Morning America. Watch that.
There is no doubt in your mind what motivated this attack.
I could only go off of their words. I mean, who says empire, this MAGA country, ties a noose around your neck and pours bleach on you? And this is just a friendly fight? I will never be the man that this did not happen to. I am forever changed.
I mean, you can't make this up. The only thing that was truthful is the last part, when he says, I will never be the man that this did not happen to. I am forever changed. Indeed, he will forever be the man known for perpetrating the most appalling hate crime hoax in modern history. But in attempting to pull off this phony melodrama, he also revealed to the country what we've become, a nation whose currency is victimhood. And even more telling, Smollet revealed how willing the President of the United States and Legacy Press, they were so willing to go along with this hoax, so long as it perpetrated this all-important victimhood narrative, perpetuated. Jussie Smollet could have ignited a race war in America. Honestly, is that what he wanted to do? He's not sorry. He's only sorry he got caught. He should go to jail. That he lied in court. What he did was bad. He's actually confident that they can overturn those charges. I'm not even kidding you. Now, can you imagine that a narcissistic, privileged, and immoral Hollywood actor looking to jumpstart his career might do something like this? Of course, that seems like plausible. But what does it say about the state of our country politically, spiritually, emotionally, and intellectually that you have a Democrat Party that would go along with it and dignify it? What does it say about the media that they would amplify this story? I will never forget Brian Stelter saying, well, you weren't there, you don't know what happened. Well, we kind of do now. What does it say about our nation that an actor would conclude that this is the best way to get ahead in America? It's also telling that BLM, the Marxist organization that thrives on resentment and victimhood and identity politics, they put out a statement that said it still supports him. For real, their actual statement. They said, quote, "We can never believe the police, especially the Chicago Police Department, over Jussie Smollet, a black man who has been courageously present, visible, and vocal in the struggle for black freedom," end quote. Well, what about the other black participants in this that came forward to accuse him? This hoax was a step forward for black freedom. How? And why would BLM support Jussie Smollett after the lies and the scam were exposed? Oh, because, again, all these players only care that people see themselves as victims. And without victimhood, they have no movement and no resentment to leverage. And revolutions feed on resentment. But Jussie Smollett is not a victim. He's the ultimate example of where victimhood gets you. Nowhere. We can create a nation of victims, but ultimately it won't produce anything but a race to the bottom. Just a bunch of people sitting around thinking about all the reasons that they can't get where they want in life, but they don't ever consider what's actually holding them back. It's not society. It's not systemic racism. It's not their neighbor who has more. It's themselves. And as Smollet's discovered, we are all our own greatest impediment to our success. In one sense, it's true that he was attacked in that alley that night, but not by 2 dudes in a MAGA hat, but by himself. He attacked his own credibility, and he attacked, it hurt the country. And he impugned the character of a lot of people because he wanted to benefit off of it financially. I hope he never lives this down. And he definitely doesn't seem sorry for it. He refuses to apologize, and he still sticks to his story because, what else has he got to lose at this point? He can't admit it now. It's like proof that in the end, when you play the victimhood, when you play that game, the biggest loser is always you. So we'll continue this discussion next with analysis from Tim Graham of the Media Research Center, because apparently nobody in the networks last night talked about this. They got this one wrong, and they do this all the time. Find out on the other side. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers are still abysmal. Inflation is still skyrocketing. And instead of following the former president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills we can't pay for. Take proactive steps and protect your wealth in retirement by investing in gold and precious metals. And legacy precious metals can help. Washington prints money to pay for their bills, but all that does is devalue your dollar. Gold offers a hedge against inflation. As the dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. The folks at Legacy Precious Metals are the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals. They have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their free investor's guide full of useful info at legacypminvestments.com. Welcome back. Continuing the discussion of that Jussie Smollet verdict with somebody who has a little thing or two about media. Tim Graham is the director of media analysis at the Media Research Center. He's also the executive editor of Newsbusters. Tim, I'm sure that you have reams and reams of material over at Newsbusters about all of the networks discussing the whole Jussie Smollet thing, right? Because so many of them were right out of the gate wrong about it. And they were saying that, oh, Chicago, Barack Obama said he's so racist. And look at these MAGA people. I'm sure you got a ton of video, right?
There was all sorts of things. I mean, this is one of those things where you really wish the news media would be a little bit humbler and a little more skeptical. But it was these were the Trump years. They really wanted to believe that Trump voters, like first of all, that there were a lot of Trump voters in downtown Chicago.
At 2 a.m. in the middle of a polar vortex, too.
Yes, wandering in the streets, holding a noose and a bottle of bleach.
Just looking for somebody to get.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you just think, remember this whole silly notion that if your mother says she loves you, check it out? That is not the principle these people operate under. This shape was shaped so well to fit their narrative that they just couldn't help themselves.
What gets me, too, is that somehow displaying any kind of not hesitancy from maliciousness, but just as you were just talking about, responsibility and doing due diligence as your profession, that was viewed as, well, I guess you're just racist MAGA now. The left has created this giant like boogeyman that they're so terrified to even ask questions as part of their own job because they're terrified that their own base is going to think that they're maybe aligning with MAGA, they're aligning with Republicans somehow if they ask a question. I mean, that's I think the new standard of measure now in journalism.
Exactly. As I think that there's this whole sense of certainly during the Trump years, this was the whole notion of you can't normalize. It's too normalizing to ask the basic questions that journalists are supposed to ask. And I suppose we got there, but not before somebody like Robin Roberts at ABC just completely embarrassed herself in boosting this man's credibility instead of seriously questioning him.
And don't you think that she has, I mean, this is kind of rhetorical, but let me ask it like this. Is there any way, do you think that she has to address this, right? Because this was Good Morning America. She has him on there and they spent, I think it was ended up being 20, almost 30, they had it in parts. It ended up being a 20 or 30 minute bit altogether. And they were talking about, I don't know if I could heal after this because, of what was done to me, Robin. And Robin's like, oh, yes, it's so horrible. And she just she gave legitimacy to his claims by using her platform and ABC as a way of showcasing this. Doesn't she have some kind of responsibility to go out and say, you know what, we got this one wrong. And maybe we got it wrong because we were so eager because we're racist, because we totally bought into it.
They did do about 18 minutes, but that's not counting all the blurbs and promos, and I'm sure they promoted the show on all their primetime shows coming up tomorrow. And look, why did they select Robin Roberts to do this interview? Black and gay interviews, black and gay. And therefore, it's another reason she can't ask tough questions, but she's presumed to be the most sympathetic figure on the staff. And I think that you could say that because they have that match, she should be able to ask tougher questions, but that's not the way it operated. What they've actually done here is they've ignored the entire trial at Good Morning America until it was over. And frankly, they haven't touched it. And we counted 666 days that they haven't done this. And Robin Roberts, whether she manages her own Twitter account or she has people, they've been blocking everybody that's asking her questions.
They blocked the guy who does Grabian. I mean, he just was like a news service. He just asked all he did was ask where Robin Roberts was, and 2 seconds later, he's blocked. Did you get blocked?
I believe we are blocked, but we would have been blocked a while ago. I mean,
I'm jealous because I'm not.
I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, we're just asking questions. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do, and that is, why did you do it this way, and why are you not taking responsibility now? It would be responsible to have a 2 or 3 minute segment saying, gosh, we got that wrong, people. But that's what's wrong with television news is, they want to run around saying that Trump is shameless about lying. Well, if they want to be the opposite, then they shouldn't be so shameless when they get something this wrong. They should actually have a segment that says, we got it wrong, we'll try to do better the next time.
Isn't her blocking you just a way of her saying, how dare you do the journalism on me? I do journalism on you, not the other way around. That's kind of what it seems like.
I think we find that a lot of people do this to us. Katie Couric, I mean, they're very sensitive people. And I don't generally tend to ask questions. I might tag you when I have something I want to say to you, but I don't tend to ask as many questions. But yes, Scott Whitlock, who's done all of this work for us, was tagging and asking all the producers' names he could find on Twitter over at GMA. And we're not getting any responses, but this is, again, the news media not transparent. They should be transparent, and there should be apologies and retractions and pledges to do better.
Doesn't the press see that this kind of stuff here is what makes the American audience at large distrustful? Because isn't their approval rating like below that of Congress's at this point, which you have to really try hard to do? Do they not understand that this ultimately is why people don't trust them, and that at some point this translates to this translates to something monetarily too? I mean, they might lose viewership, which ads are based on. I mean, I can't believe that there's no one at these networks, Tim, that steps up and says, just for our credibility and our bottom financial line, maybe one of you all should say something. Or do you think that they think it's worse that they acknowledge it?
I think they do think it's worse that they acknowledge it. I think that they just their general practice is to just sort of hope it goes away. It doesn't matter whether it's Matt Lauer doing what Matt Lauer did. I mean, they bury it, they walk away, they try to pretend these things never happen. It is the way they do things. I mean, the proper answer is no, they don't take responsibility. I mean, CNN, their media unit put out their newsletter last night, basically yelling at Fox for daring to say that this undercuts the media and their credibility. And that's exactly the wrong response. The CNN media newsletter should be analyzing how everybody got this so wrong instead of yelling at Hannity because this is embarrassing for the mainstream media.
Good heavens. Tim Graham with MRC Newsbusters. Tim, always appreciate what y'all do over there. Thanks so much. Good to see you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Coming up, folks, we'll dive into another story that the legacy press got totally wrong. That has to do with the rise of crime across America. It's kind of hard to believe, but no, it's actually not legal firearm ownership that's getting people killed in blue cities at record rates. We'll explain next. You have homeowners insurance for a good reason, because without it, a fire could burn your house down, a flood could ruin your house, somebody could destroy everything steal everything you have, and you're destroyed, and what are you going to do? There's another major crime that your homeowner's policy doesn't cover, and it's called home title fraud. Law enforcement calls it one of the fastest growing crimes, and it can ruin you financially, so you should get home title lock. Title fraud happens when some shady person decides to forge your signature on a document stating that you sold your home to them, which you didn't, and then they can take out loans on your home and leave you with the payments. You will spend a buttload of money trying to prove that you did not commit fraud. Home title lock puts a barrier around your home's title, and if they detect anyone trying to forge their way onto your home's title, they'll help kick them in the shins and stop them. Visit HometitleLock.com, register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim, and enter code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. Welcome back. So the left is working overtime to link the homicide increase in American cities to gun ownership, when in fact it's their soft on crime approach known as, very flowery phrase, restorative justice. Now, the latest assertion comes via an article from 538, which, by the way, this is a worthless piece of non-journalism. So here is what they said via tweet yesterday. Quote, as the pandemic progressed and gun sales continue to climb alongside shootings. Researchers have puzzled over the connection between these two intersecting trends. Was the surge in violent crime related to the uptick in guns sold last year? End quote. Of course, the article wants you to think that there is an increase in crime due to the uptick in gun sales. The article is a collaboration between 538, an anti-gun nonprofit, The Trace. It's Bloomberg's attempt to make himself a newsroom to seem bipartisan. So it's like not even hardly unbiased, is being very generous in that description. 538 argues that correlation is absolute causation in this piece. They say, quote, was the surge in violent gun crime related to the uptick in guns sold last year? We may not get a definitive answer to that question for years, but fresh data from the ATF and explosives also provides some of the first evidence that a relationship exists, end quote. It doesn't. Narrative, it doesn't. Narrator says it doesn't. They go on to say, quote, put more plainly, thousands of guns purchased in 2020 were almost immediately used in crimes, some as soon as the day after their sale, end quote. Then they go on to cite a number of gun crimes, again, trying to establish some kind of, causality between the increase of what was purchased and the crime. And then they add, quote, overall, I think we can say that the gun sales surge contributed to a surge in crime, but it's also possible that it's not solely responsible for the increase in short time to crime recoveries. I love it, by the way, when advocates spend multiple paragraphs to shore up a point with super weak arguments only to walk it back all later for plausible deniability, because they're pretty sure that the increase of firearm sales is the exact reason why crime has exploded, but just to cover their asses, it's possible that it's not. Now, buried later on, they say, quote, researchers interviewed for this story cautioned that the number of guns recovered and traced by law enforcement does not always indicate the amount of gun crime in a given year, end quote. Duh. I mean, it's funny because a year ago, 538 argued against rising crime in their piece titled, quote, many Americans are convinced crime is rising in the U.S. They're wrong. And by the way, that was when background checks for firearm purchases hit a record high the exact same year. Now, another one from Vox in 2016, quote, this is actually the headline, Americans don't know crime has plummeted. In fact, they think it's gone up. And the one day overall crime is down, according to the media. The next day it's up because of gun sales, of course. So, and in 2016, it's important to know, gun sales set a record in 2016, right? They had a record number of sales. In fact, gun sales have been trending upwards for almost 30 years now. A very inconvenient wrinkle for the blame guns narrative, because crime's been going down nationally. Now, a few other things that 538 left out. First off, they didn't even verify how many of the cited homicides were committed by repeat offenders or committed by people who had legally purchased their guns. And they didn't mention that the decrease in crime actually intersects with the record rise in firearm ownership. In fact, they intersected 20 years ago. According to the American Enterprise Institute, even if you're not convinced that increased gun ownership reduces violent crime and gun homicides, you should be totally convinced of this fact. Gun violence, so to speak, or homicides committed with illegally carried firearms, has been decreasing significantly over time, not increasing, like you hear from anti-Second Amendment politicians and progressives. Now, while crime has decreased over the past nearly 3 decades as firearm ownership has increased, there are a handful of major cities that see a spike in homicide rates. So just the nuance here. Nationally, crime is going down, but there are 12 cities that they see it specifically going up as it relates to homicide. 12 major U.S. cities have broken annual homicide records in 2021, and there's still 3 weeks to go in the year. Of the dozen cities that have already surpassed the grim milestones for killings, 5 top records that were set or tied just last year. Now, experts say there are a number of reasons possibly connected to the jump in homicides, strained law enforcement staffing, maybe a pronounced decline in arrests, continuing hardships from the pandemic. There was an ABC piece, but there's no clear answer yet across the board. The increase in homicides in these cities is not due to law-abiding people who are legally purchasing guns. Now, I've addressed this before. It's because of this woke restorative justice that prioritizes the criminal over both the victim and justice. For instance, the former superintendent of the Chicago PD once slammed the drop charges and weak sentencing from prosecutors and judges, telling the press that the same repeat offenders drive the city's overall crime rate. In fact, the same 1,400 reoffenders. This is true, and the restorative justice-induced efforts of these reduced deterrents are spreading across the country. Case in point, new data from Colorado highlights how this is ultimately playing out in every state. The Common Sense Institute has studied the crime rate in the state of Colorado and crime rates across the country, and they compared. Their findings, well, they discovered, quote, average monthly crime rate in 2021 is 28% higher than it was in 2011 and 15% higher than it was only 2 years ago in 2019. Colorado had the highest increase, they write, in its property crime rate between 2011 and 2020 among all states. And they continue that Colorado's violent crime rate in 2020 was 35% higher than 2011, and nationally the rate grew by only 3%. Now, they also add that the 2020 murder rate was 106% higher than that in 2011. The rape rate was 9% higher, with assaults up by 40%. And in 2021, they note 65% of arrests in Denver were of people who had at least one other offense in the prior 3 years. 30% had 5 or more arrests since 2018. CSI further argues that, quote, trends in these outcomes across the criminal justice system reflect how one-sided policy changes over the years have altered the system. And as a result of multiple reforms, the trends across bond practices, parole rates, and incarceration levels all point to a system tipping further away from accountability, end quote. Understanding the overall crime rates is an important starting point, but the analysis doesn't stop there. Colorado is looking for a deeper understanding of how these recent changes in their criminal justice system have been impacting their rate of crime. So CSI was looking at it, and they said across the board, the trend has been to reduce sentencing requirements and lessen sentencing outcomes for offenders. Several recent policy trends seen within the system, they say, require greater evaluation to determine their causal relationship to the massive increase in crime in Colorado. And they note that evidence from Denver County Court records shows a significant increase in the use of personal reconnaissance, those bonds, PR bonds, and very low cash value bonds, even for really serious offenses, even like felony charges for firearms. Now, overall, the national incarceration rate has dropped to its lowest level since 1995. Another example, Wisconsin's prison population also dropped within the last year. And the report found the number of jail inmates ticked upward in the second half of 2020, reflecting an increase in gun violence and homicides, as well as a backlog in trials and prison transfers. That's according to a couple of sources, including Wright, Wisconsin. One of Wisconsin's most recent tragic cases is that of murderer Darrell Brooks. Brooks now faces 6 counts of intentional homicide after he plowed through a Waukesha Christmas parade on November 22nd. Dozens more were injured, as you know, many of them seriously. And the heartbreaking fact is that Brooks should have been in jail, but he was free on a measly $1,000 bond after he was arrested on charges of running over the mother of his baby days before he massacred people in Waukesha. The obscenely low bail amount for a career criminal and repeat bail jumper was at the discretion of a man named John Chisholm. Chisholm, the DA, he's acknowledged that the bail recommendation was, quote, inappropriately low. Now, according to news articles, he says his office was investigating. But this is all part of that restorative justice sought by DAs like Chisholm, more often than not backed by infamous far-left billionaire George Soros, which is a real thing that he's backing these weak DAs. When asked if Chisholm's lax bail policies would get people killed, he famously told the press, and I quote, "You bet it's guaranteed to happen," end quote. He really actually said that. And they wonder why record numbers of Americans are buying guns. Coming up, we'll get even more analysis on all of this from the National Shooting Sports Foundation's Matt Manda. Stay here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company that serves premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and is a CIA contractor. He modified even his gun trucks while he was in Iraq so he could grind coffee everywhere he went. And every morning overseas, he cheers his coffee with his team leader before heading out on patrols. Great coffee has a way of grounding people no matter where they are. And through coffee, Evan was able to experience that perfect morning every morning, whether he was in Kabul or its sister city, Seattle. So make someone's holiday better by giving the gift of Black Rifle Coffee. Visit blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV. Check out the freshest coffee in America. Their team made your holiday shopping easy with personalized bundles, gift cards, and a whole lot more. Make your holidays better with Black Rifle Coffee that actually roasts their own coffee and doesn't have somebody else do it, and they just put a sticker on it. blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV gets you 20% off coffee, apparel, and gear, plus 20% off the first month of the Coffee Club. Well, in case you're just joining us, we were just discussing why your illegally owned firearm is not the reason for spikes in homicide in 12 different cities around the nation when the actual overall crime rate nationally has been on the decline. So much of this is restorative justice. So we wanted to bring on someone to discuss this further. We immediately called up Matt Manda of National Shooting Sports Foundation, NSSF. He's kind enough to join us. Matt, thanks for being here. I saw this. I keep seeing this narrative try to get jump-started by a lot of people in the press, and of course I'm referencing this 538 piece that came out yesterday, and it was basically an editorial and then a link that had nothing to do with their claims. And they were asserting that, well, there's 12 cities, and it kind of playing off a piece that ABC was writing about. We see some increased homicide rates in 12 cities, probably because people are buying guns. Well, in reality, when you look at these 12 cities, and there was some great data recently out of Colorado showing that these lowered deterrence, lowered sentencing, and this, basically the way it's described as restorative justice, this is why we're seeing the increase in crimes and, of course, the recidivism rate going right along with it. But the reaction is to always blame firearm ownership. And I wanted to talk with you about this because, correct me if I'm wrong, which I don't think I am, when looking at all the data on this, firearm ownership has been increasing exponentially while nationally the crime rate has been going down. And I thought the intersection was like 20 years ago on that.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks, Dana, for having me on. And I know it's a couple weeks away, so Merry Christmas to you and your family and your viewers. So appreciate the time given to us. It's interesting that the article starts off and talks about the firearm buying for the past couple of years being due to the pandemic and never mentions some pretty significant other reasons why people went out and legally purchased a firearm. The article 538 does not mention any sort of rioting, any sort of looting, any sort of defund the police, where Americans across the country were concerned for their safety and went out and legally went through the background check process. 20 million, 21 million in 2020, and so far 16.7 this year with a month to go. So law-abiding Americans were concerned for their safety across the country. And like you said, in these cities, you don't have to look much further than, just in the last couple of weeks, Los Angeles, where the district attorney talked about he was proud of the record there, letting criminals off easy, including one convicted murderer who, after spending 6 years in prison of a 50-year sentence, is out. And the LAPD released a press release telling people to cooperate and comply with follow home robberies. These are law-abiding Americans going out to purchase firearms, including in states like California, including in New York City, where you had massive riots and violence over the last 18 months. And you had a mayor and a governor bickering at each other and throwing blame. So if Americans aren't going to see leadership and safety from their elected officials, including in the cities you mentioned across the country, they're going to go out and they're going to buy a firearm. And 21 million last year, 16.7 this year, went through the legal process, passed the background check, and went home with a firearm. And I'll add, education, training, permitting courses across the country have been jam-packed over the last 18 months. So these are people that are interested in safe firearm ownership. They know about the responsibility that comes with it, and they are interested in practicing it.
And the 538 piece also didn't touch on, when they were talking about firearms traced, they were cautioned at a couple of different points. I thought it was interesting by researchers. But then they didn't actually say, okay, were these repeat offenders? Are these criminals? Did they purchase their firearms legally even? I mean, that's kind of important data if you're trying to make the argument that all of these law-abiding people out there buying guns are now turning around and shooting towns up.
Yeah, and you made an interesting counterpoint to right away when they were writing about how thousands and thousands of firearms were immediately turned around and used right away, time to crime. And then they mentioned two examples where we know in the vast long-term data trends from, they were citing ATF data and FBI data, and the long-term trends of the FBI's data says the average is about 9 years. So if you're going to talk about what is different over the last 2 years, like they would like to frame this argument, you can't just say it's coronavirus, and you can't just say it's law-abiding Americans buying firearms legally.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. Last question for you, Matt. We appreciate your time today. The people who are purchasing firearms. Everyone always likes to, you know, and I find this interesting as well because it has changed so much in the past 20 years. And it's even actually changed a lot in the past couple of years because you got a lot of suburban folks out there going, okay, we don't like what we're seeing on the news. We don't like all the stuff about defund the police. And, you know, they see crime rates rising in their cities because of some of these other policies. But tell us, who's actually, in the past like 2 years, we've seen record number of sales. Who's actually making these purchases?
Well, it's a great point. The firearm owning community across the country has changed dramatically. And leading the way, I believe in 2020, African Americans purchased firearms at a 58% higher rate than they did in 2019. Hispanic Americans have gone out and purchased firearms over that same time span, 40% higher. Asian Americans, I believe, was about 42% higher. So the community is changing a lot. I believe the National African American Gun Association had record membership over the last summer, including 1,000 members a day for a stretch across the country. So you're seeing, you can easily Google articles about new firearm ownership. It's all over the country. And these are people talking about taking their safety, the safety of their families, into their own hands because they see what is happening in the lack of leadership and will to keep them safe from a lot of these elected officials in states that have very strict gun control. They're still going out to buy them legally in record numbers. And if nothing changes, they're going to continue to do so.
Well, that's great. That's great news. And I'm happy to see it expand so much as well. Matt Manda with NSSF. Matt, thanks so much. Merry Christmas to you. Appreciate your time.
You as well, Dana. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, folks, that does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend. Good night and don't bend the knee.